Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. Hope you're doing well, you, your family, your team, everyone around you as we roll through. Gosh, what's today? We're in September as I'm recording this, so happy Labor Day weekend. We just got through as I'm recording this. What's today? The 4th of September. Whenever you may be listening, this will probably post later today or tomorrow. Yeah, a lot going on in my world. As I think I shared last week, we dropped Samantha, our older daughter, off at college a few weeks ago. So life is changing and school is starting both for her in college and for Rosie, her younger sister, who just started her sophomore year. And maybe it's because, we helped Samantha pack and move, or I don't know, the end of the summer, even though it's not officially the end of the summer. I guess that's a few more weeks from now. But like, I got this whole thing this weekend that like this past weekend that I wanted to do a lot of clutter clearing and just clear out the garage and clear out, some of the rooms in the house and closets and different things. And ultimately, I ended up here in my office clearing things out. And I don't know about you, but it tends to be Michelle and I do this, once a year, twice a year. I don't know, at different times. It's not always in the spring or the fall or the beginning of the year or the end of the year. It just whenever it happens to be. But I just notice there's so much energy that comes from clearing the space. And so I've been thinking more about like what that is. I mean, there's the practical part of like, recycling things and, getting books out and old clothes and things or whatever. And look, I mean, we're all a little bit different about how we manage our physical space, right? Like I come from a family where the house I grew up in, um, there was a lot of clutter. There was a lot of stuff. There was, and my mother wasn't great. I mean, she was a single mom raising two kids. She was busy. My dad wasn't around. She didn't have a lot of time or energy or money or, a resource to manage stuff. So things just kind of piled up and things kind of broke and things weren't always working so well. It was mostly a function, I think, of our financial situation. But like, I feel really fortunate and grateful that we're not in that same situation here at our house. So we don't have an enormous amount of clutter and things that are broken and things that pile up all over the place. And I don't say that with a lot of, arrogance or even judgment, if that may be the case for you. It's more just for me, like I like to have my physical space somewhat clear and clean as much as I possibly can. We like, Michelle and I both like to have things in order and things put away and, just living life and raising kids, even though now they're teenagers and not, babies and toddlers. It's a challenge to keep up with this stuff. Right. But I think for a lot of reasons, a lot of us can let things accumulate, whether it's on our phones or our computers, or whether it's in our desks or our offices or our bedrooms or our garages or our basements, if you live in a place where there happens to be a basement, or the shed or the backyard or whatever the case may be. But there's real power, I think, when we do clear the space, both the practical part of just creating more space for new things or different things, but also just what that does to us mentally, emotionally. But why is it hard to do this? Or why do we accumulate things? Does clutter, back up on us, if you will? I mean, I think there's a number of different reasons. Again, some of it's just kind of personality and style, or how we grew up, or where we grew up, or the house we grew up in. And maybe we do it just like our parents, or we do it differently. But I think, some of it for me, clutter tends to pile up when I get busy, when I'm not prioritizing things, when I get a bit frantic, when I'm, traveling a lot or doing a lot, or, sometimes the physical space isn't conducive to a system to have things organized. Sometimes it's fear, there's certain things. I mean, Michelle and I laugh about this, but there's certain things that I hang on to. Like I keep a lot of paper for better or worse. And I know a lot of people have gone paperless or everything is electronic these days, but like when it comes to financial documents or, just insurance policies and things, like I'm so used to having the physical copies of those things and keeping them in folders and wanting to have files. Like, again, I think there's a positive part of that of being responsible and organized, but there's also just like it's a lot to manage. I tend to keep a lot of files, files for just about every client and every speaking engagement that I've had over the last couple of decades. Because, maybe I'll have to refer back to the notes, or maybe there'll be something in there, or maybe they invite me back to speak a few years later and I want to go back and look at my notes from what I talked about the time before. Now, Again, I could keep a lot of these notes electronically. I don't. I use legal pads and steno pads to take notes and keep notes. And I keep all that stuff. If I'm working on a client engagement or an event, that'll all go in a physical folder where, I print things out for better or worse. There's probably ways to save more trees and be more environmentally conscious about it. I'm very well aware of that. But that just tends to be some of my style. What's your style? And then, of course, there's your, spouse or significant other if you live with someone else, or your children. And trying to figure out how we manage our physical space is a big deal. Now, think about our workspace, right? Many of us go into an office, and maybe more so now than we did a few years ago with respect to the pandemic, but we tend to have a workspace at home and a workspace in the office. And how do we manage that? How do we keep track of things? How do we organize things? And this isn't really a conversation about organization per se, but it is about the importance and the power of us clearing space. One of the things over the weekend, I got rid of a ton of books and was able to bring them to a used bookstore and some to Goodwill. Books that I've read, books that I've appreciated getting, but books that are taking up space. And as someone who writes books, I'm aware of the fact that sometimes the books that I've written and that people have bought or been given maybe get recycled or get passed around. That's actually fine. I don't think books are meant to be kept forever and ever and ever. I mean, if it's a really important book or a book we want to pass down or a book that we definitely want to keep on our shelf for a long time or have other people have access to, that's great. But it felt really good to get rid of those books. I went through a bunch of old tax returns and a bunch of old financial and legal documents and realized I don't need to keep these. I spent a lot of time shredding documents, right? Not because there was anything nefarious about them, but just because they have, social security numbers and account numbers and things on them. But like, it felt so liberating to do that. And, moving clothes around, moving things out, recycling things, giving stuff away, bringing things to Goodwill. It feels like a recycling of the energy, an opening of the energy, right? Sometimes the best thing that we can do in the middle of our day, even as busy as we are on Zoom meetings back to back or running here and there, is stop and actually clear off our desk or reorganize our desk or go through our files or familiarize ourselves with the things that we have. Because if we don't do that, things can accumulate, right? Maybe it's files on our desktop, on our computer, or making sure that everything is in a place that it's easy for us to access. And again, it's not so much about having a very detailed organizational system. And maybe you do, maybe you don't. If you struggle with this, there's people that you can get help from about it. You don't have to figure it all out yourself. But think about how much stuff accumulates in our mind, accumulates in our space, and what it frees up when we actually move it out or let it go or clear some space. Look, we are inundated with information all day, every day, right? You're probably listening to this podcast episode on your phone or watching it on YouTube, also either on your phone or on your computer. Think of all the information that's coming at us on a daily basis. And we have to filter through it. Think of all the emails and all the text messages and all the Slack messages and all the LinkedIn messages and wherever else we get messages from or we're getting information or content from. It's a lot, right? And can we figure out how to create some space in our minds so that we can actually focus on what's important? And again, sometimes it's physical space. Sometimes it's taking that Saturday or Sunday afternoon to clear out the garage or the closet or go into the office on the weekend and really just file away things or whatever the case may be. And again, the pace at which we work these days can be so intense. We don't often take the time to really slow down. I mean, I talk about this a lot. I've talked about it here on the show, but I often get invited to, you know, speak at or facilitate workshops at retreats or offsites for teams, leadership teams. Sometimes it's just, the senior leadership team and there's 10, 12 people there. Sometimes it's a big, you know, event or offsite or conference where there's hundreds of people, if not thousands of people. And in a practical sense, those events usually don't really work, right? We don't really have time to spend a whole day or 2 days or 3 days or whatever at this event, offsite, away from the office, away, flying everyone in from around the country or around the world. Like it's a big investment of time, of resource, of money, of energy. But those are necessary, whether we do them monthly or quarterly or biannually or even annually. we need to be able to slow down, to step out, to pause, to reflect so that we can really think more about how do we want to operate as a team? How do we want to focus on the strategy or the goals of the business or whatever the case may be? It's also true, I think, for us in our own lives. That's why I'm such a big proponent of taking time to reflect and create around the new year and the holidays. It can be around our birthday or other times. It's important to do this with our spouse or our families. Take time away to retreat. I mean, that's an example of creating some space. Maybe we're not clearing out the garage or the closet or reorganizing the desk or rearranging the furniture necessarily, but it is an example and a very practical way for us to create some space and clear some space. Because without doing that, things get cluttered, things get laid on top of each other, on top of each other, on top of each other. And then we don't have the mind space, the white space that's necessary for us to create what comes next, right? It's like, how come sometimes the best ideas come when we're in the shower? It's because we're not looking at a screen or doing something else. We're just taking a shower, or you're on a walk, or you're driving in the car, and maybe you don't have a podcast playing or the radio going. You're just thinking, or you're sitting on an airplane. I mean, again, all of these things nowadays don't necessarily lend themselves to white space in and of themselves because we have to actually put our computer or our phone down and just let ourselves think. So, both the physical clearing of space as well as the mental emotional clearing of space is essential for us, for our wellness, for our success, for our connection with other human beings, for our connection as a team, for our creation of new ideas, new projects, new goals, whatever it may be. So what are some things that we can do? There's four specific things that I want to talk about here today that we can do. The first thing that we can do in this regard is declutter our physical space. Now, you don't have to do it all at once. And if it gets out of hand, which it sometimes does, the closet is overwhelming, the garage is overwhelming, the desk is overwhelming, we can start with something small and manageable. Maybe it's just this corner of the desk or this corner of the room or just the back seat of the car or the trunk of the car or whatever, right? If we clear out the unnecessary items, if we go through what's there, and ideally, again, I'm not an organizational expert at all, but if we do it in a proactive, consistent way, it doesn't have to be this big monumental thing. Now, sometimes that's the way it's gotten, and so we have to start. But if we can declutter our physical space as much as possible, if we can look at our workspace, if we can look at our sleeping space, our living space, like what's in the physical environment, does it inspire creativity? Does it inspire connection? Does it inspire thought? Does it inspire focus? And look, I realize some of this is resource specific. We may not have as much flexibility with our physical space as we'd like. We may not have the money or the resources to do what we need to do. We may not necessarily always feel like we have the time. But if we can declutter our physical environment, it makes a huge difference, right? Sometimes we got to go slow so we can go fast. The second thing that we can do is create some mental space. Now, that can be, again, unplugging from technology. That could be meditation. That could be journaling. That could be going for a walk. There's lots of ways to create mental space. You know, going into a sauna or a hot tub or whatever. If you have the ability to do these things, there's lots of ways. Closing your eyes, taking some deep breaths. I mean, it can be more involved or less involved, but what helps clear your mind? Maybe it's, again, in the middle of the day, getting up and walking around the office, or you're working from home, getting up and going outside and walking around the block. Like, what do you need in between Zoom meetings or in between stuff to create some mental space for yourself? So it's not just work, 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 doing, 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 doing. Again, we end up cluttering up not just our physical space, but our mind with so many things and so much coming at us, right? Oftentimes, even you take a lunch break and you're busy, scrolling on social media or watching a video on YouTube or even listening to a podcast, again, which you're doing right now, which I appreciate. Maybe you're watching the video of this, or maybe you're actually just listening to the audio of this, which I find listening to podcasts to actually be, depending on the podcast, of course, quite relaxing, quite inspiring. It's something I do sometimes early in the morning as I'm cleaning up the kitchen or as I'm going on a walk. However, there are times for me even to turn off the podcast or turn off the music or disengage from the YouTube video or whatever it is to really just let myself breathe and think and feel. So, whatever it is for you that would create mental space, can you do that on a regular basis? The third thing for us is, can we let go of emotional baggage? What are we holding on to? What's weighing us down? You know, one of the things that I have done for a while, and I think I've shared this a number of times here on the show, right? I keep a gratitude journal, which I have for many years, but it evolved a few years ago for me from writing down three things every day that I'm grateful for to writing down three things I'm grateful for and three things I forgive myself for. And that's a way that I practice letting go of some emotional baggage. So I'm not, or I'm attempting to at least let go of the things I might be holding on to or kind of beating myself up for. Another thing, and this last week, actually, interestingly, I don't know if it's a chicken and egg thing related to the clutter clearing or space clearing. I've actually been focused, actually, for the last 2 weeks on forgiveness and really looking at who are some of the people and what are some of the situations where I'm holding on to resentment, bitterness, grudges, if you will, right? I love the saying, holding a grudge is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. We're the ones that keep drinking the poison. We're the ones that's hanging on to the negativity, the bitterness, the blame, the judgment, the resentment. And again, it's not to say that there aren't things that people do or situations that happen that upset us, but can we deal with that directly? Can we feel the emotion? Can we work through it ourselves? Maybe we have conversations with people if necessary, but we don't have to hang on to the resentment, to the bitterness, to the grudge. And if we do, that weighs us down. So can we let go of some of that emotional clutter, if you will, within us? What are we hanging on to? Who are we blaming? And sometimes it's ourselves. But proactively and consistently focusing on forgiveness, compassion. And again, there may be some times to have some of those sweaty palm conversations, but there's so much stuff that you and I end up, it's like we're carrying around a bag and we keep throwing these emotional rocks into it and we can't figure out why we're tired or why we feel sort of weighed down. And then the fourth thing is focusing on prioritizing and simplifying our commitments. Sometimes when I feel really overwhelmed and there's so much going on, and I'm grateful to have a full schedule and have a lot happening and clients and friends and speaking engagements and podcasts, interviews and trips to take. And I mean, I love that. I'm grateful for the activity, a lot of the activity in my life. And sometimes my schedule can get really cluttered and I can overcommit myself to things. And sometimes what can be really helpful for me, and when I'm coaching people, I often have them do this, is really do an audit of all of the commitments and all of the things on the schedule. Are there things that we can go through and actually say no to or renegotiate or get back and say, you know what, I said I was going to do this thing. I apologize. I'm going to need to recommit or pull back from this. I'm feeling overwhelmed. I really have to prioritize. Look, life sometimes has a way of forcing this function, if you will. Something happens, something serious happens to someone close to us or to us, a health thing, another thing, a situation that really needs a lot of our attention, and we all of a sudden have to clear the decks. Now, that's going to happen in life, but what if we did that more proactively and we prioritized and simplified our commitments? We're really clear with our yeses. And if it's not a full yes, then it's a no. And we can say no. And remembering that no is a complete sentence. And that's a hard sentence sometimes for us to complete, especially with certain people and in certain situations, right? But clearing out the clutter, if you will, is both the physical space clutter in our living space and our workspace, but also the mental, emotional clutter that can build up in our minds, in our hearts, in our nervous systems, in our bodies, in our psyche, if you will. So those four things, right? Declutter our physical space, create mental space for ourselves, let go of emotional baggage, and prioritize and simplify our commitments. If we can focus on those four things, even though it can be tricky and it can be challenging, and there's a lot of reasons why a lot of things clutter up, both physically and practically, as well as mentally, emotionally, that can create, these four things can create more space for us. And in the creation of the space, not only can we be more peaceful, not only can it benefit our mental and our physical health, it actually creates the space necessary for us to be creative and do the things that we want to do. And, really go for those goals and those dreams, or come up with new ones, or put our creative energy into the manifestation of the things that are most important to us, to our families, to the people around us, to our teams, to our businesses. So it's really important for us to do. Thanks for listening or watching, whether you're listening on whatever podcast app or platform you like to listen to, or you're watching this on YouTube. Always appreciate that. Especially appreciate it when you share episodes with other people that you think they might benefit from. Make sure you hit the follow or the subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. And there's a bunch of links in the show notes down below where you can learn more about me, connect with me on social media, or find out more about my work. Best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work. And remember, we're all in this thing together.